by Kirk Meadowcroft. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Dale Grothman. A bizarre little story is this: The Echoing Point by Kirk Meadowcroft. It was near the close of my last year at college, and this night I had worked later than usual in the chemical laboratory to put my notes in shape for the professor to examine the following day. Only the one light over my desk was burning, and the janitor, waiting to close the hall for the night, stood at the door. Finally, he shuffled over beside me, and I expected that he was about to ask me to leave. But he only said, "You would search out the secrets of the universe, would you? Like all the rest of them. If you were but wiser, you'd live days and dream nights in terror, lest you find out what the universe holds." I put aside my notebook to listen to this grizzled old man, who leaned on his broom and talked with the accent of the English countryside, so different from the speech of the Englishman one commonly meets. 2 generations of professors had studied, lectured, and died since he had been the guardian of the hall, and he had seen much with the quiet, unhurried watchfulness of an unlettered man. Discarding the rules of the building, I lighted a cigarette. "Ye not be one to tell if I smoke by pipe, then," he said. "And as for knowing too much, have you read the ancients? Stupids among them same as we, but others. Every line of their books was fair quivering with what they knew and dared not tell. They knew as well and more as the country lads that spent the night on the green hill." There rose perversely in my mind a picture of pudgy old Professor Winterbottom, who was the author of some 30 volumes, large and small, on chemical theory, and who looked like a successful stockbroker, interviewing the unknown and unbelievable. "Nay," said the janitor, reading my thoughts, "he knows not but his work. He would see not. Did his own house stand on its head instead of its toes, he would step in by the window and never heed." Then, as the thought of one will often call to mind its opposite, my thoughts turned to the story of Professor Hazlitt's, as I had heard it from my father, who had been a student at this same college at the same time when the brilliant young teacher had so suddenly and so strangely broken down in the midst of his success and disappeared into a private asylum, hopelessly mad. "Do you know about Hazlitt?" I asked. "Hazlitt? Who told ye of Hazlitt?" "My father," I answered, "who studied here before me." "Aye, it would be more than 20 years since Hazlitt. He saw the universe, and he went out by the little door, and no one saw him after." He puffed his pipe vigorously for a moment. "Happens I know what he saw, for I was with him. 'Twere no matter of use to tell them then. It was in the year he made full professor of physics, and the boys were coming to his courses in flocks, for he always had a keen way of lecturing that the boys liked. He began to work late, nights, in his office here. This very room was his study, you may not know. He was writing a paper on the physical properties of polydimensional space. I mind the name of it well, for I have the paper at home. When the president, old McDonald it was then, came here to look over the poor man's paper, he saw the one on the desk. 'Poof,' he said, puffing his cheeks. ''Tis the work of a poor mad brain. You'll burn this rubbish, janitor.' But I kept it instead, for I was younger then, and there were times I thought the president an old fool. Along in December came from England a man that Hazlitt had known before. He came every day to the study, and they talked late together. I would hear 'em as I swept out the room, for Hazlitt was a thinking man, and would not willingly delay me in my work. The man from England had been in some society for finding ghosts and spirits, but they had put him out, as I understood it. I remember him saying they wanted only gentle spirits that they could ask to rap on tables in the parlor and read numbers in a hat. I showed him what I could, and after the last meeting, the chairman came, trembling all over he was, and said in his squeaky voice, You had best resign, Mr. Thomas. We had a fancy table tipping, but it is devils in the sight of hell that you have brought. And he looked over his shoulder as though he feared what stood behind him. And devils in the sight of hell it likely was, for I could only show him what I had found, said the man from England. The janitor fumbled for a match and relit his pipe. And all the time Hazlitt only sat there in his chair and drummed with his fingers, wonderful thin fingers he had, and said, That is so, or I have never seen that. One night I asked him what it all meant, though it was seldom that I troubled him with questioning, and he told me. It is to find a place where we can't go to, he said. Is it a place in this world? I asked. No, he said, it's not. He said it was like the other side of the mirror, here, and yet not here. And he said that in that world a man could go nowhere, but that he must wait for a place to come to him. Can you believe that? He said. Believe not, learn not, said I, and I saw little then of what he meant. Still, I asked him if the place would come. Thomas says it will, he answered me, and then he went out. A few nights after, they were talking, and I heard Thomas give a great gasp, like a man choking. It's here, he said, it's here. They both listened, and I left off my sweeping to listen too. It was like the voices of people going by in a car, but there was no car, and their voices were in the room, and they were crying. One little voice began to sing, and Hazlitt leaned forward in his chair, and his eyes were awful. It's Annie, 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 he kept saying. The song went off into a scream, and he fell over on the desk, with his hands pawing the papers, and his heels kicking the chair, like a man in a fit. The noises grew further and further off, and it was Thomas and I that got him into a cab and took him home. I asked Thomas what it was that had come into the room. He asked me if I had ever been in a whispering galley, where you stand in a certain place and hear the voice of someone that you can't see. He may be close by, just around the corner, or far off, you can't tell. But he said this was like a whispering gallery, as big as the whole world, and the sun, and the stars. You could see not, only hear. The janitor knocked out his pipe on the floor and started to refill it, when we heard the steps in the hall outside. He stuffed the pipe into his pocket. It's the new night watchman, and sweeping not done yet. Quickly, he began to brush over the floor, while I gathered up my papers from the desk and stood ready to leave as the door opened. The man who entered was not the night watchman, but a tall, lean man with deep lines in his smooth-shaven face, who said, "Good evening, Tim," to the janitor in a voice that made the old man look up with a start. "Good evening, Professor," he answered, and his hand shook till the broom handle rattled against the desk. The professor looked at me with some surprise, then called me by my father's name. A moment afterward, he became abstracted, repeating to himself in a low voice, "There is another way." He kept moving his hands, and I noticed the slim fingers, gray and pale like all the rest of him. Some design seemed to be in his mind. Then he noticed us again and said, "You can neither help nor hinder." Only come over near me and stand without moving. We had no power to disobey that voice. We watched him without even wondering as he took handfuls of earth from his pocket and sprinkled them carefully in a figure that enclosed us all. By that, the old janitor knew what he was about to do. He told me in a whisper, "It be black magic to draw the other world to this same place again. There has been those who could do it in times past." But he grew uneasy. Once he spoke aloud. "You will lose your soul, sir." "What needs have I for a soul?" said Hazlitt. The janitor made no answer. "Not to draw the figure, but to project it. Not to draw, but to project," whispered the gaunt man to himself, as over and over he crossed and interlaced the lines. When it was finished, he stood waiting, but his knees shook, and, gently as we could, we helped him kneel. Outside, the sound of the wind sweeping over the roof rose louder and louder. And it may have been more than the wind, for as it came rushing on, Hazlitt started up. But his foot slipped and he fell half over the border of the twisting lines. He lay without moving, and the wind passed on. The old janitor knelt at his side for a moment, and then, going back to his broom, began very carefully to sweep up all traces of the sprinkled earth. Once he paused to look at me and said, "'Twere his heart. There's no need to say aught else." It was thus that we reported it. The end of The Echoing Point by Kirk Meadowcroft.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.